The story of the Winslow family is unlike most of Appalachia's whispered horrors. While other clans linger in local legends, half feared and half rumored, the Winslows are different. They were vanished not just from the mountains, but from history itself. No census records, no gravestones, no birth certificates, only fragments, a torn diary, a charred foundation, and a trail of disappearances that no official authority has ever acknowledged. It begins in the winter of 1938, deep in the hills of West Virginia. A pair of surveyors mapping land for a new coal company stumbled upon something they weren't supposed to find. According to the surviving field notes, they discovered an old homestead tucked inside a narrow hollow. The place was crudely built shacks of timber nailed together at strange angles, roofs patched with animal hide, and fences made of scavenged bones. But what caught their attention was not the poverty, it was the silence. No livestock, no smoke from chimneys, no footprints in the snow. Yet, as the men explored further, they felt eyes on them. One wrote in his notebook, "Shadows in the timber. Not men, not animals. Something in between." That night, only one of the surveyors returned to town. The other was never seen again. His partner, shaken and rambling, refused to explain. The company hushed the matter, and the land was declared unsuitable for mining. The Winslows, it seemed, had already claimed it. But who were they? Local whispers suggested the Winslows were descendants of settlers who split from society in the early 1800s. Rather than integrate into nearby towns, they retreated further and further into the mountains, intermarrying and cutting themselves off from civilization. Over generations, the isolation took its toll. Accounts describe children born with twisted limbs, mouths too wide, and eyes clouded with milky whites. Unlike most families, who might have hidden their shame, the Winslows embraced it. Their patriarch, Elias Winslow, was said to preach a twisted gospel, claiming their deformities were signs of divine purity. To outsiders, his sermons were madness. He told his children that the flesh must be broken so the soul can be whole. To the Winslows, it was law, and it didn't stop with bloodlines. The Winslows were notorious for their feasts. Hunters passing through the hills in the 1920s spoke of hearing strange music band, strings plucked off rhythm, guttural chanting, and the unmistakable crack of bones splitting. Some returned to find their traps emptied and bloody footprints circling their camps. One hunter swore he woke to find pale faces pressed against his tent wall, grinning silently before vanishing into the trees. Then there were the disappearances between 1915 and 1940. Dozens of cases were quietly filed away in county records. Children vanished on their way to school. Travelers went missing along back. In one case, an entire family abandoned their farmhouse overnight, leaving a dinner table set, food untouched, and no trace of where they had gone. Yet none of this reached the newspapers. None of it was formally investigated. Why? Because the Winslows weren't just feared, they were protected. Old-timers say the Winslows had struck an unholy bargain with certain county officials, offering bribes of meat, pelts, and silence in exchange for being left alone. Others whisper something even darker, that the Winslows provided offerings not just for themselves, but for the powerful men who looked the other way. This uneasy arrangement lasted until the 1940s. Then came the fire. On a cold autumn night in 1947, flames erupted across the Winslow homestead. Locals reported seeing smoke curling up from the hollow for days. But when they dared to investigate, they found only blackened ruins. The shacks were gone. The fences collapsed. Ashes scattered where bones once stood, and no bodies, not one. Some claimed the Winslows had been consumed by their own rituals. Others believed the family fled deeper into the hills, retreating into caves and abandoned mine shafts where no one would follow. A few even whispered that the fire wasn't an accident at all but an intentional purge. ordered by men who had grown tired of keeping their secrets. For decades afterward, the Winslows were treated as a ghost story. Parents used their name to scare children into obedience. Don't go too far into the woods, or the Winslows will take you. But beneath the folklore, something remained. Hikers continued to vanish. Farmers found mutilated livestock, and every so often, someone would return from the hollow, claiming to have seen pale, misshapen figures, watching them from the tree line. Then, in 1993, the legend reared its head again. A pair of spelunkers, exploring a collapsed mine shaft near the original Winslow land, stumbled upon a chamber filled with relics. Bones stacked neatly against the wall. Carvings etched into the rock spirals. Crude faces, symbols no one could decipher. And in the center of the chamber, a wooden chair bound with ropes, stained dark with something that had seeped into the wood. Authorities dismissed it as the remnants of squatters or backwoods cult activity. But the spelunkers knew better. They claimed the air in that chamber moved as though something was still breathing in the dark, and that was only the beginning. Because in the years that followed, more evidence surfaced. A torn Winslow family Bible, recovered from an abandoned church. Pages filled with names that never appeared in public records. A diary from a young girl in the 1920s who wrote of brothers who walk on all fours. And most disturbing of all, a VHS tape discovered in 2001 in a junk shop in Charleston. The tape, unmarked and grainy, showed a group of gaunt figures gathered around a fire. Their features were indistinct, their voices muffled, but their movements were unmistakable, jerking, unnatural, as though their bones bent in ways they should not. At the edge of the firelight, something else moved, taller, hungrier. Watching them, the Winslows had been forgotten. But they had not gone. The fire that consumed the Winslow homestead in 1947 should have ended their story. But the deeper one looks, the clearer it becomes. The blaze wasn't a conclusion, it was a transition. The Winslows did not vanish. They adapted. They learned to live not in open hollows and crude shacks, but underground, within the veins of the Appalachian hills themselves. For decades, the Winslows were nothing more than a whispered memory, until the 1960s. It began with miners. In 1962, a group of coal miners in Logan County reported something unusual. They claimed to hear voices deep within the mine, voices that were not echoes of their own. Laughter, screams, chattering in a language none could recognize. At first, supervisors dismissed the claims as exhaustion or superstition. But then the disappearances began. One miner, John Henry McGrath, never emerged from the shaft. His helmet and tools were later found neatly stacked near a wall of rock. Another, Samuel Boone, was dragged screaming into the dark, in full view of his co-workers, who swore pale, grasping hands pulled him into a side tunnel no one had ever mapped. When the company sealed the mine weeks later, they refused to comment on what their rescue teams had encountered. Locals began whispering the Winslow name again, but this time there was something different. Survivors described figures that were far more grotesque than the rumors of the 1920s. Elongated limbs, skin stretched thin across ribs, faces too smooth, as though features had melted away with time. Whatever the Winslows had become, isolation had twisted them into something more beast than human, and yet they were not mindless. Evidence of intelligence emerged in 1971, when a hiker named Robert Tully went missing in the Monongahela National Forest. Weeks later, search teams discovered a crude lean-to shelter built from tree limbs and deer hides. Inside were objects that could only have come from Tully's pack: his canteen, his map, and his camera. But the strangest discovery was the camera itself. The roll of film had been used. When developed, the photographs revealed a series of unsettling images. At first, ordinary shots of the forest. Then, progressively stranger, blurred shapes in the trees. Low angles, as though the camera had been dropped. And finally an image of a group of figures standing in a circle. Their faces were pale, their bodies hunched, and their eyes gleamed like glass in the flash. The final photo was the most chilling. It was a close-up. A face pressed against the lens, wide mouth split into a grin, teeth jagged and stained. The photo abruptly cut off in static light flares, as though the camera had been yanked away. The Winslows were watching, and they wanted Robert Tully to know it. The government's role in this era remains shrouded in mystery. Declassified documents from the 1980s hint that both the FBI and local state police received multiple reports of strange feral clans roaming abandoned shafts and tunnels. Some files even reference Operation Lantern, a covert project aimed at mapping underground cave networks across West Virginia, though the documents don't name the Winslows outright. Several eyewitness descriptions of hairless, malformed bipeds line up perfectly with the clan's folklore. So why didn't the public hear about this? Because every investigation ended the same way: sealed mines, closed forests, and vanished evidence. Families of the missing were told their loved ones had succumbed to accidents, animal attacks, or exposure. But among locals, the truth was already well known. The Winslows were still here, and they had only grown hungrier. By the 1990s, the Winslows had shifted from rumor to taboo. Hunters spoke of mutilated deer carcasses left hanging in trees, arranged in grotesque patterns. Campers vanished without a trace, leaving only torn tents and scattered clothes. One chilling account came from a pair of college students in 1997 who dared each other to camp in the hollow, where the Winslow homestead once stood. They lasted one night. The survivors, only one of them returned, claimed they were woken in the dark by something circling the camp. Branches snapped, rocks clattered. Then came the whistling, not birds, but human lips, mimicking a tune in broken rhythm. As the fire burned lower, shapes gathered just beyond the glow. Pale skin, bent spines, faces with no expression, watching silently. The student fled at dawn, never returning to college, never speaking again except to repeat one phrase: "They wanted me to join the circle." But perhaps the most disturbing modern evidence came in 2004, when a group of spelunkers, exploring the Cass cave system, reported finding something they could not explain. Deep within a cavern, far from any mapped path, they discovered a series of stone altars. Each was smeared with blackened stains, surrounded by bones, human and animal alike. Among the debris lay objects decades out of place: a child's shoe from the 1930s, a miner's helmet from the 1960s, and a rusted rifle. One of the spelunkers managed to capture video before fleeing. The footage, though shaky, shows what appears to be movement in the shadows, figures crawling across the walls like insects, too fast to be natural. The video ends abruptly, with the sound of screams echoing through the chamber. Authorities dismissed the footage as a hoax, but the locals knew. The Winslows had never died. They had simply gone deeper, carving out a kingdom in the caverns below Appalachia. And like all kingdoms, theirs had rules. Survivors of encounters often describe a ritualistic pattern. Victims are not immediately killed, but stalked, observed, toyed with, as though the Winslows were choosing, deciding, testing. Some bodies are never found. Others are returned, placed carefully near roads or trails, positioned almost ceremoniously as though to deliver a message. We control these hills. You only walk them because we allow it. By the 2010s, the legend of the Winslows resurfaced online. Amateur ghost hunters, cryptid chasers, and thrill seekers all descended into West Virginia with cameras, hoping to capture proof of the forgotten clan. Some returned with grainy footage of pale faces in the tree line. Others didn't return at all. One chilling Reddit thread from 2017 describes a group of hikers who stumbled upon a stone marker deep in the woods, a rough carving of an open mouth, its teeth jagged and uneven. They laughed it off, taking pictures and leaving offerings of beer cans. That night, their phones captured audio of scratching outside their tents, followed by guttural chanting. When they woke, the beer cans were gone, replaced with bones sharpened into spikes, driven into the ground around their camp. The poster ended their story with a warning. We thought it was a prank, but then one of us went missing a week later. They never found her. The Winslows had become more than folklore. They were a living, breathing nightmare, forgotten by history, erased from records, yet thriving in the shadows. And those who cross into their domain quickly learn the truth. The family never stopped. They only evolved. But the question remains why? Why does this one family endure when others like them faded away? Why has every attempt to expose them ended in silence? The answer may lie in what the Winslows worshipped, because scattered among the ruins of their homestead, carved into wood, etched into stone, whispered in the diary of a young Winslow girl, as a single phrase repeated again and again, the hollow mouth must always be fed. And if that phrase is more than metaphor, then the Winslows are not just inbred cannibals clinging to life in the caves of Appalachia. They are priests to something older, something that was here long before settlers ever came to the mountains, something that still waits by the time. Whispers of the Winslow clan reached the 2020s. Most dismissed them as backwoods legend, no more threatening than Bigfoot or Mothman. But those who live closest to the hollow know better. The forest remembers. The caves breathe, and the Winslows endure. What makes their story truly terrifying isn't just their survival, or even their brutality. It's the sense that the Winslows are not entirely human anymore. That truth came into sharp focus in 2021, when two amateur filmmakers from Kentucky, Emma and Jorgen, set out to document the Winslow curse for their YouTube channel. They weren't skeptics, but thrill-seekers, armed with night vision cameras. They ventured into abandoned shafts along the Tug Fork River, hoping for clicks. Not answers. They got both. The first hours of footage are ordinary rusted tools, collapsed tunnels, graffiti from generations of trespassers. But halfway through the recording, their tone shifts. Whispers filter through the darkness, captured faintly on audio. Not echoes, not wind, but voices. Childlike, repeating the same phrase. The hollow mouth must always be fed. The pair laugh nervously, joking about sound design, until Emma suddenly stops. She points her camera at the wall of the shaft. There, carved deep into the rock, is a perfect circle filled with jagged lines like teeth. Dozens of circles, in fact, covering the stone like an infestation, some fresh, others ancient, layered over one another. Minutes later, the laughter ends. The video cuts to Chaos Jordan screaming, Emma's flashlight flickering. Pale limbs dart in and out of frame, too fast to follow. One shot lingers long enough to capture a face, smooth, stretched skin, no nose, teeth filed 2 points. Not a mask, not a trick. A Winslow. The final frames are blurry, Emma's breath ragged, her voice whispering, "It's under us. It's under us." Before the camera crashes to the ground, the police eventually found their abandoned car near the trailhead, but Emma and Jordan were never seen again. What Emma said it's under us echoes in countless accounts of the Winslows' local folklore insists. The family worships an entity older than any settler's memory, the hollow mouth. Some describe it as a presence within the caves, an endless pit that hungers. Others call it a beast, a shadow of gnashing teeth that devours without ever being seen. But they call it their guardian, and the evidence is chilling. In 2022, a group of spelunkers, exploring an unmapped cavern system near the Tug River, stumbled upon a vast underground chamber. At the center was a hole in the earth perfectly circular, edges too smooth to be natural. Surrounding it were hundreds of bones, piled into crude totems, each marked with the familiar tooth circle symbol. The group swore they heard something breathing from within the pit, not air moving, breathing. Terrified, they fled. Only 2 of them made it out. The others never recovered. When rangers investigated weeks later, the chamber was gone, collapsed or sealed. Officials declared the spelunkers had become lost in an unmapped cavern, nothing more. But the survivors insisted the truth. The hollow mouth wasn't just a myth, it was real. And the Winslows were its servants. So, what exactly are the Winslows now? Theories range from genetic to supernatural. Anthropologists who dared to examine recovered bones quietly handed down through local families described deformities beyond standard inbreeding, elongated jaws, additional rows of teeth, even bones etched with strange carvings, as though rituals were performed on the skeletons themselves. Some believe the hollow mouth altered them, reshaped them into something between human and monster. Others think the Winslows embraced self-mutilation, carving themselves into the image of their god. But the most disturbing theory comes from those who believe the Winslows are no longer bound to flesh at all. One account from 2019 described hikers in Mingo County who saw pale figures dissolve into shadow, slipping into the stone walls themselves, not running, melting, as though the caves had claimed them. If that's true, then the Winslows are no longer just cannibal survivors. They are part of Appalachia, now woven into its rock, its roots, its endless labyrinth of caves, watching, waiting. The real horror, however, is not in what the Winslows are, but in what they want. Their rituals, their hunts, their offerings all point to one goal: feeding the hollow mouth. The phrase repeats across history, carved, whispered, sung in guttural tones. Victims are not always killed immediately. They're watched, tested, chosen. Some are consumed by the family. Others, it seems, are reserved for something else, something deeper. If the hollow mouth is real, then every missing hiker, every lost miner, every vanishing camper wasn't just a meal for the Winslows. They were sacrifices. And if that is true, then the Winslows are not monsters. They are priests. In 2023, a final chilling piece of evidence surfaced. A hunter exploring near the Tug Fork discovered an abandoned camcorder, half buried in the mud. The footage was shaky, but what it captured is perhaps the most terrifying glimpse of the Winslows to date. The video begins with frantic breathing and stumbling. Through the woods, the man filming whispers, "They're behind me." Then, in the distance, a figure appears tall, hunched, with arms too long. Behind it, others emerge, dozens of them, moving in unison. The hunter trips, the camera tumbling into the grass. For several minutes, only audio plays, chanting. The phrase, "the hollow mouth, must always be fed," repeated again and again. The last thing captured is a deep, guttural roar, not human, not animal, that shakes the microphone into static before the tape cuts off. The hunter was never identified. Today, the Winslow Hollow remains unmarked on maps, avoided even by the boldest locals. Authorities dismiss the legends, insisting the family is long gone, nothing more than folklore. But ask anyone who lives in the shadow of those mountains, and they'll tell you the same thing. The Winslows are still here. They don't need cabins anymore. They don't need farms or fires. They have the caves. They have the hollow mouth, and if you wander too deep into their domain, you'll hear it too, that faint, whistled tune in the trees, the whispers in the dark, the scratching outside your tent at night. The Winslows aren't hunting you for food. They're preparing you for sacrifice, because the hollow mouth is always hungry, and the wind will never let it starve. If you thought the Winslow story was disturbing, you haven't seen anything yet. Appalachia hides countless clans and legends that make the Winslows look almost ordinary. So before you wander too far into the dark, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next tale may be the one that keeps you up tonight. And tell me in the comments, do you think the Winslows still walk these hills? Or did something else take their place?